Morning, everyone. I'll just give you 1 minute for the newcomer to find their seats and we can begin. So welcome to the lecture of Siam Society today. I think the subject is very interesting. I was talking to the speaker today and sometimes so many things in Thailand that we think we know, but we know it at a very superficial level. Given the topic today that you're presenting to us on one of the ethnic groups, that when people go to Surin, they would know that, oh, there are people catching elephants, doing something about elephants. But how much do we know about them? And I think the author tonight and the speaker has a very illustrious academic background. You can read her CV. That's the proof of the quality of the presentation she'll be giving to us today. But I would be very much interested because she'll be telling us so many aspects on heritage. Is it social heritage? Is it historical heritage? Or something of natural value? So I think her study has incorporated so many angles of this through her research on this topic. And may I present to you Dr. Alisa Santikarn. Yes.
Thank you. So yes, as was said, today I'll be talking about my research, The Last Elephant Catcher's Invisible Indigenous Heritage in Thailand. And you might have seen my CV, I've had the introduction already, but just a little bit more about me. This talk today is based on my PhD research and in particular fieldwork I conducted in Surin between 2018 and 2021. And it's also the topic of my upcoming book with Amsterdam University Press, which will be coming out hopefully later this year. This is also my first time presenting this research in Thailand, so thank you very much to the Siam Society for giving me this opportunity. I also just want to flag before I get started that I'm not an expert on the Kui. That's not how I want to position myself. There's many Kui people out there who are better placed to be experts on their own culture. At the very end of the presentation, I'll have a QR code with some links to research where you can do some further reading about the Kui, and a lot of those links direct you to websites that are written by members of the Kui community as well. So to give you an idea of what I'll be talking about today, I'm going to start by talking about indigeneity in the context of Thailand. I've only got about 45 minutes to talk to you, so this will be very brief. I'm missing out on a lot of historical context, but I'm just trying to give you the Cliff Notes version of it. And then I'll go into the case study of the Kui and Surin. And then the focus of the talk will be on the end of elephant catching. What caused it? What impact did this have on the Kui community? What were the community's responses to the end of elephant catching? And then I'll end by looking at some of the remaining spaces we have for Kui elephant heritage. Okay, so with that, indigeneity in Thailand. This is a very complicated topic. The quote I've included here comes from the Thai ambassador and deputy permanent representative of Thailand to the UN. It's from a letter he wrote in 2021 in response to conflict over the Karen community regarding the World Heritage nomination of the Gangajan Forest Complex. So in this, he states that Thailand has consistently maintained the interpretation that the term Indigenous Peoples refers to those who are pre-settlers or had lived in the area in the pre-colonial period, which is not applicable in the case of Thailand. And this generally reflects the state's stance on indigeneity. There's a couple of things that I want to address here. The first, in red, as I've noted, this definition of indigenous that requires a country to have been colonized really doesn't fit neatly within a lot of Asian and African contexts where you do have indigenous peoples, but you didn't necessarily have settler colonialism in the same sense that we see in North America and Australia. The other thing I want to kind of unpack is this idea that Thailand never was colonized. So again, a lot more complicated than I'm going to make it. But different scholars have described Thailand's interactions with colonialism and how they're not necessarily as neat as this saying that Thailand was never colonized. Hertzfeld calls it crypto-colonialism. You also have people calling it semi-colonial or an example of internal colonialism. And so just some examples of the colonial influence that Thailand or Siam experienced. In order to avoid direct colonization, Siam engaged in multiple treaties and trade concessions with various colonial powers to ensure that no single colonial power could have a hold on the country. One of those treaties was the Boering Treaty with Britain, and one thing that's notable about the Boering Treaty is that it actually conferred extraterritorial rights to Britain. You also see the creation of a Thai ethnic identity that emerges in response following France's annexation of Laos in 1893. So what happened after that annexation was that France tried to say that any area of Siam that had Laotians living in it should be French territory. And so in order to protect its borders, Siam created this new ethnicity, Thai, that would encompass everyone living within its borders so that they could say, what Laotians, everyone here is Thai. Alongside the creation of this new Thai ethnicity, they also created a new heritage and a history to support this ethnic identity. Alongside this, you see an adoption of colonial racial politics that defined Thailand racially. And then government policies of assimilation to maintain this illusion of ethnic homogeneity. So we see that, for example, in Pibun Songkram's cultural mandates between 1938 and 1942, which codified Thainess. Mandate 1 renamed Siam to Thailand, literally a land of Thai people. You had mandated use of the Thai language in Mandate 9. Mandate 3, among other things, banned non-Thai ethnic identification and made that everyone had to identify as Thai. And then you also have the creation of Pad Thai, which wasn't one of the mandates, but was attributed to Pibun Songkram. And then this illusion of ethnic homogeneity is then reinforced through the census. And so because of that, today, we still don't have clear figures on how many indigenous peoples there are in Thailand, and Thailand does have indigenous peoples. And these are various estimates, so 20 groups, 1 million people, 42 groups, over 4 million, or somewhere between 600,000 and 1.2 million people. One of those groups, and the group I want to focus on today, is the Kui, and in particular, I'll be talking about a subgroup of the Kui community known as the Kui Ajiang, and Ajiang here means elephant in the Kui language. I put the hand on the slide as a reminder for me because I have a question to ask you, but I'd just like a show of hands of how many of you who aren't related to me have heard of the Kui before today. Yeah? Nice, that's great. I have to admit, before starting my research, I had never heard of the Kui before. And that's one of the things that motivated my research is why haven't I heard of a group that by all means should have been very prominent within Thai history. So hopefully the talk today, more of you will learn about them as well. Just to flag, because we are in the Siam Society, the Kui have been written about in the Journal of the Siam Society, starting in 1929 with a paper documenting the elephant hunt by then Vice President of the Siam Society. You've also got papers from 1952 and 1987, so there is this history of the Kui and the Siam Society there. Okay, so who are the Kui? There are Kui communities in Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and Thailand. They are indigenous to the northeast of Thailand, and there's, again, muddy estimates, but maybe some 400,000 Kui people in Thailand. As I mentioned, I focus on the Kui Ajiang, which translates to the elephant people, who primarily live in Surin, but also surrounding provinces like Buriram and Sisaket. And the Kui Ajiang have a long history and heritage centered around the capture of wild elephants for various purposes across time. This is the history of the Kui that was told to me by Prakru Uptamwarakun, who is a Kui man and a monk in Surin. So he says that the Kui began in Assam. And the reason for picking Assam as the location is because in Assam you also have this capture of wild elephants, particularly using a method known as the mela shikar, or shikir, which is a very similar method to the one the Kui use today. So they trace their origins to Assam, a group splintered off going to Mongolia, whereas another group carried it on, going to Thailand, Laos, then Cambodia, and Vietnam. Within Thai history, we also have some references to the Kui. So local chronicles mention a Khmer king, Angkor Thom, who asked for help from the Kui people to quash a rebellion. You also have a royal criminal act in 1431 during the Ayutthaya period that kind of bans marriage to foreigners. It says that people shouldn't give their daughters to foreign people, and they list which foreigners you shouldn't give your daughters to, and the Kui are in that list. And they're also in a list that regulates trade by land and sea. And what's interesting about this reference to the Kui as foreigners in this case is that, as you can see in the quote here by Chit Pumisak, the Kui were not serfs in the kingdom, but had a separate country of their own. So at that time, the Kui had their own territory. They did have land, and that land is what we now know as Thailand, part of it. And they also had political status as a result. In 1717, in the Isan Chronicles, we hear of a group known as the Kui, who are famed for catching wild elephants. The political status that the Kui at one point held changes in 1782, when you have economic and political restructuring and the shift of the capital to Bangkok. With this, you get the introduction of this term soy, who some of you who may have heard of the Kui may have heard of them called by this name, soy. And they were called prize soy, which means people who were taxpayers. And the Kui had to pay tax to the capital from the late 18th to the late 19th century. This tax was primarily forest products, given their location close to forest areas. It might take the form of elephants, beeswax, ivory. But when they weren't able to pay this form of tax, the tax took the form of human labor, which we would call corvée labor. And that's why, for many in the Kui community, this label that has stuck with them, soy, means to them slave. So it's actually a pejorative term. So one thing I would ask is don't refer to them as soy. If you can, use Kui. And then in 1759, we also get this story. So this is a scene that's depicted in the center of Surin province. That's where these statues are. And it tells a story of how a white elephant escaped from Ayutthaya. And a group of 5 Kui brothers eventually join in and help capture the white elephant, return it to the king. As a reward for their work, their duty, their loyalty, the brothers are given titles and land. And one of the brothers, Cheng Pum, comes elevated to Praya Surin Pakdi, and his village is moved and made into what we now know as Surin. So this is Praya Surin Pakdi, the founder of Surin, a Kui man, and this is a statue at a roundabout in the center of Surin. So for those of you who haven't been to Surin before, I just want to show you some pictures to kind of contextualize where I was doing my work. These are mainly photos from the provincial capital, and Surin is known as Thailand's elephant capital, as will soon become clear. So when you arrive, if you fly there, you'll fly to Buriram and then take a shuttle that will drop you off in Surin. And this is where they drop you off, right outside the Elephant Museum. The street signs have elephants on them, the street lamps have elephants on them. There are posters everywhere about various elephant-related activities, and I'll be talking about the Surin Elephant Roundup as well. And then, as I said, this scene sits opposite the statue of Cheng Pum. However, one of the abbots at a Kui temple pointed out some inconsistencies with this statue. He said, it's all wrong. There should be 2 riders per elephant. They're holding the rope incorrectly. It's an incomplete scene. So Prakru Dr. Samuhan, the abbot at the temple, said, "I don't have any objection to it. It just doesn't have any meaning." So then this is why in my title I put invisible with in brackets, because I'm talking about how the Kui are very visible in many ways. There's a whole statue scene to them, but they are still invisible in many ways because they're often represented incorrectly. Okay, so going to the crux of the talk, I was interested in looking at the end of elephant catching, what caused it, what are the consequences. And when I was doing my research, I kept finding this reference to an elephant catching ban. But when I dug into it more, I found that it wasn't actually a ban that caused the end of elephant catching. We have another hands up symbol, so this is my last interactive question for the talk. Can anyone tell me what this image is? Does anyone recognize it? So this is Prairie Han, or I should say Prairie here. And I say Prairie here so that I don't pick a side, use the Thai name. It's a contested monument, as some of you may know, so I'm trying to stay neutral by pronouncing it Prairie here. So a little timeline of this temple. In 1863, Cambodia became a French protectorate. Then in 1904, you have the signing of the Franco-Siamese Treaty, where Siam cedes territory south of the Dang Rec mountain range to France. Prairie, at this time, the temple, is still in Siam. Then in 1907, a second boundary treaty is signed. Maps produced by the French topographical officers place Prairie Temple in Cambodia. So this new map doesn't follow the natural watershed, but it also isn't contested by Siam at this time. So this map, you can see the border that was drawn by the French Commission in 1907. So here. And then that's the temple. And then this would be the natural watershed. And this comes from a Thai internal working document as part of the International Court of Justice case, because as I said, it's a contested site. But this kind of better illustrates the contested territory. So the original map line, what Thailand says the map line should be, and where the temple sits. In 1953, you get Cambodian independence. And then the following year, Thai troops occupy and raise a Thai flag at Prairie Temple. In 1958, Thailand temporarily closes borders with Cambodia following a collapse of diplomatic relations. In 1959, Cambodia files proceedings against Thailand over Prairie Temple with the International Court of Justice. And then in 1961, you get the second border closure. And I've highlighted these two border closures because they are what had the most impact on the Kui. 1958, the first time the borders closed, is the date that most people give for the elephant catching ban. So what I found was that it wasn't a ban that stopped the end of elephant catching, it was the closure of the border. So this might better illustrate it. Here we have Ban Daklang, which is one of the big elephant villages in Surin. This is the Dang Rec mountain range. These are the elephants. They're not just there, they're all along. And then that's Prairie Temple. During the border closures, the Kui were unable to cross to their primary elephant catching site, which was on the Cambodian side of the border. They tried to sneak across, but I don't know if you've ever met an elephant, but they're not very subtle. And it's quite hard to sneak anywhere when you have 5 elephants in tow. They also risked being shot because the border was militarized at some points. So what the Kui had to do was move to their second elephant catching location. And they did have a second location, and that was in Loei. So that's up here. And there are some problems with Loei, and just for elephant catching reasons, no other reasons. The first is that it's some 400 kilometers away from where the Kui were. The Cambodian permit cost about 20 baht and allowed the Kui to catch an unlimited number of elephants, whereas the Loei provincial governor limited the permit to 3 elephants. and negotiations for these permits were very complex and often resulted in bribes being needed to pay. And so the cost of the permits were higher overall as a result. Loei also has a thicker forest and more difficult terrain and fewer elephants, so overall not ideal for elephant catching. And so ultimately what I found was that elephant catching came to an end largely due to inconvenience prompted by this border closure. When I asked when was the last elephant caught, I was given a range of dates between 1960 and 1967. So you can see even after that second border closure, the more permanent border closure, people still tried to catch elephants, but it eventually trickled to an end, and we still don't have a clear date for when the last Kui person caught a wild elephant. You then get later legislation like the Wildlife Preservation and Protection Act of 1992 that made it legally impossible to catch wild elephants. But like I say, that law didn't come into action until 1992, so there wasn't that initial ban until then. So what impacts did this have on the Kui Ajiang? The end of elephant catching prompted run-on effects for other traditions and put these at threat of being lost. And I'll go into that shortly, but I just wanted to touch on what impact it had on Surin. So this is a quote from Ignacy Ribo, who says, "It's with this symbolic elephant, prevalent in Buddhist temples, government buildings, national monuments, and even advertising, that most Thais today have an emotional and meaningful relationship, while the real elephants trudge unheeded in nearby tourist camps, or slowly and ineluctably vanish from their very few remaining refuges in the hills and forests of the country." And what Ribo's saying here is that the elephant that most Thai people today interact with is this symbol. And if you think back to those images that I showed you of Surin, the living elephant has very much been replaced by this symbolic elephant, by these images of elephants. So the loss isn't felt as much as it is felt by those who have this constant daily interaction with the animals. So like I said, there's some Gui traditions that were put at risk following the end of elephant catching, and I focused on 3 of them in my research, and I'll talk through them now, starting with the Ma Chang, the elephant doctors, or the elephant catchers themselves. So the main issue that the end of elephant catching produced for the Ma Chang isn't that there are no longer Ma Chang. There are still Ma Chang today. There are young generations who are learning to become Ma Chang. But the problem is that it's a hierarchical role. And in order to move up the ranks, which are about 5 ranks, you need to catch a certain number of elephants. So how can you move up the ranks if you can't catch elephants anymore? And the man Bunma Sandi here, he is currently the highest ranked elephant catcher in Surin. The top level is called Kru Bayai. Bunma isn't technically a Kru Bayai, but he's taking on that role because there's no one else left to fulfill it. So already, the last generation of people who had this Kru Bayai status, and I think you have to have caught 50 or more elephants to have that status, they've all died already. So what they do is today they catch baby elephants who are born in domesticity. And this is because the Gui believe that every elephant is born with a wild spirit attached. So by catching the baby elephant before they perform a ceremony to remove the wild spirit, they are technically catching a wild elephant. So this quote comes from Saipa Salakam, who's one of the younger Ma Chang, who says that we need to adjust today to use baby elephants, but we still perform old customs to preserve them when the older generation dies. But not everyone in the Gui community, not all of the Ma Chang agree with this loophole that's been used. And so a caveat that came up a lot in my interviews was this concept of real. Are you a real Ma Chang or not? So Bunma Sandi, who I've already introduced, the highest ranked Ma Chang, says there are no more real Ma Chang because you can't be a real Ma Chang unless you catch elephants. But most of the younger generation would disagree with him. So Apinan says, I am a real Ma Chang. Noon says, we're no different from the old Ma Chang. Santikarn is a younger Ma Chang, and he says, the people who went into the forest to catch elephants, those are the real Ma Chang. So there's disagreement within the community. It's mostly divided intergenerationally, but even within the younger generation, there's disagreement as to whether what they're doing is authentic or not. And you see this outside of the community as well. So Krumio Salakngam, when he passed away, he was also a very high-ranked Ma Chang. The news headlines referred to the last generation of Ma Chang, and that last generation that they're referring to is the one that caught wild elephants, or who tried to, because I did speak to some who went to catch wild elephants and were never successful, but they're still considered authentic because at least they had that experience. But again, this question, real or not, is not important. We're following traditions and keeping them alive. So do you stick to the authenticity, or do you try and keep your culture alive, your heritage alive, and continue the tradition even if some people don't think what you're doing is genuine? So the second aspect of Kui heritage I want to focus on is the Begum rope. And the Begum rope is named after the Begum god, who you can see over here. And it's the rope that was used to catch elephants. So the Kui method of catching elephants is basically a bunch of men on the backs of elephants, as you saw in that wrong statue in Surin. And they would try and loop this lasso around the foot of a wild elephant to try and catch it. So the lasso is made of buffalo hide, water buffalo hide that's braided together. And the problem here is that Bunma Sandi, alongside being the highest ranked Ma Chang, is also the head rope maker. And his problem is that he can only pass on his knowledge to someone who is of equal rank to him. And we've already talked about why he can't do that, because there is no one of equal rank to him, because no one can move up the rankings, because no one can catch that many elephants, even if they are using baby elephants instead. So when I talked to Bunma about it, he said, I can't do anything about it if the knowledge is lost. That's just how it is out there. And for him, it's more important that he sticks to these rules, that he doesn't share this knowledge with anyone who isn't powerful enough to handle the knowledge. But when he implied that the knowledge will die with him, that no one will make the rope after he passes away, the younger Ma Chang I spoke with told me that they can make the rope. So they all claim to know how to do it. The thing is, Bunma is in, I think, his mid to late 90s at this point. He is not physically braiding 3 buffalo hide himself. He has assistants. I think there's around 6 apprentices who do the physical act of braiding the rope. And what Bunma does is he oversees the spiritual act, because alongside braiding the rope, they also invite the spirits of Kui ancestors into the rope and the spirit of Begum himself into the rope. So this is what Doi Salakngam said: we don't have anyone high-ranking, so the lower levels need to do it. But Bunma insists he hasn't shared this knowledge. So he shared the physical aspect of rope making, but there's something secret that he hasn't told them. So my question is, this cultural transmission has changed. The way people learn rope making, the way the Ma Chang are learning to make the rope is different. They're learning by observation, and they're only learning the physical process. So is anything lost? This knowledge that Bunma has, how does that impact the community going forwards if he never shares it? Okay, and then the final aspect of Kui tradition that I want to talk about is the Pasa Pipa, or the forest spirit language, the ghost language. And this is the language that the Ma Chang would speak when they entered the forest to catch elephants, because they believed that if you were to speak any other language, it would put you at risk. The forest spirits could harm you, they could interfere with the hunt, it could put your life in danger. So they would speak this language, which is a language of substitution. So it's made up of various languages, and when a young Ma Chang would go into the forest, they could not speak until they learnt this language. So they had to stay silent and listen and learn what these various words meant. And so it would be the very first thing they would learn. But they aren't learning it anymore. And as you can see this quote from Bunma Sandi again, people don't speak the Pasa Pipa because they've never been to the forest to catch elephants. And the reason the loss of this language relates to elephant catching isn't so much to do with the loss of wild elephants, but it's to do with the loss of wild forest. So when I was interviewing Ma Chang, this phrase bit ba kept coming up. They closed the forest. And this phrase also comes up in Thai history when you hear people talking about legislation of the forest by the government. So when the government began to control the forest, take that control away from the people, to the Kui it effectively closed it from them. And these forests ceased to be wild spaces. So because there are no wild spaces anymore, because this language can only be spoken in the wild, the language isn't transmitted. So there's some quotes here. There's no place to speak it now. There's no chance to speak. We can only speak it in the forest. And to the Kui, there is no forest anymore. No ba, which is not just forest, but wild. Okay, how am I doing for time? Plenty of time. Okay, so I will talk to you about the remaining sites of Kui heritage that we have in Surin today. And starting with the Surin Elephant Roundup. So these are some photos that I took when I went in November 2019. The Surin Roundup happens every November. It's an annual festival, and it consists of 4 acts. The first act is Kui Ajiang, people who domesticate elephants. In this act, you can see a parade of the Kui community worshipping the Pakam shrine. There are Pakam ropes there. And then you see a group of Kui Ma Chang actually round up elephants. So you see them reenact these wild elephant captures. But whereas in the forest you'd have maybe 5 men at a time, there's some hundreds of elephant performers in this roundup, so it's definitely more of a spectacle. The second act is the elephant army of Pratai Saman. And then you get the third act, the talents of elephants, which, there are 4 acts, but the time isn't divided into a quarter per act. The talents of elephants takes up about half the show. It's probably the most popular scene in the roundup. It's what most people come to see. And it is these talents. It's elephants playing football, doing tug of war, throwing darts, and dancing. I think they step over human volunteers, if you would like that. And then the final act is the elephant duel. So it's a mix of Kui culture, kind of circus tricks, and historical reenactments. But when did it start? Now, if you go to the roundup, you'll see this picture a lot. And the date that's given on this picture is 1955. And this is an image of some 300 elephants who gathered in a field in Surin. And the story goes that they heard that there would be a helicopter landing in a nearby field. And so the men of Surin, excited to see a helicopter, I guess, decided to gather their elephants and ride over to the field to see it land. And the spectacle actually ended up being the 300 elephants that waited for the helicopter rather than the helicopter itself. And so this image inspired the first roundup, which happened in 1960. In 1961, the TAT, then known as the Tourist Organization, which was very newly formed, decided to sponsor the Surin Elephant Roundup. And the year after that, it officially became a national festival. But even though it was inspired by this image, this gathering of Kui Mahuts, it's not a Kui festival. So Prakru Dr. Samuhan, who's the Kui abbot at a temple in Surin, describes it as a new tradition built for tourists. But what it is a space for the Kui to enact their heritage, to enact the elephant capture that can no longer really take place. And then these two dates, 1961 and 1962, are interesting because 1961, when the tourist organization sponsors the roundup, is the same year of the last royally sponsored roundup that took place in Ayutthaya. And then 1962, when it becomes a national festival, is the same year that the International Court of Justice made its ruling against Thailand regarding Previhir Temple. So Pichai Nowat, who was one of the early organizers of these roundups, said that this new spectacle that was the Surin Elephant Roundup somewhat compensated for the loss of one cultural treasure, Previhir Temple, by creating a new source of cultural prestige. So the decision to support this festival and turn it into a national festival was very deliberate. The next place I want to talk to you about is Bandaklang, or Elephant World, or Elephant Village, as you can see in this sign. And it's had a very long history. In 1987, Bandaklang was renamed the Elephant Village, so there was no pretense there that it's just a traditional Gui regular village anymore. It's specifically an elephant village. Then in 1989, you get a ban on logging, which results in thousands of now unemployed elephants and their mahouts. And they're called Chang Rei Ron, so these homeless elephants. A study of these elephants in Bangkok who were begging found that about 90% of them came from Surin. In 1996, you get Thai's Jumbo Village, which is created to try and support these elephants. And then in 2006, you get a project called Bring the Elephants Back to Their Hometown for the Development of Surin, which is a rather wordy title. And the aim of this is to bring the elephants back to Surin in order to create the largest elephant village in the world. So they pay mahouts about 12,000 baht per elephant per month to live within the borders of Tatum district, which is where Bandaklang is. Jumping forward a bit to 2020, Elephant World opens. It's massive, about 500 rai. It was a multi-million baht development project. There's a stadium where these elephant shows take place, and the show is mainly Act 3, the talents of elephants. You have an observation tower, which you can see on the slide there, and then a big museum complex as well. And it was designed by Bunsem Premtara, who won a bunch of awards for this architecture, and who also in 2021 was the architect for the Thai Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, where he exhibited a house for humans and a house for elephants that was inspired by the Gui's relationship with the elephants and the architecture at Tatum. So that was an interesting choice to show the Gui, their relationship with elephants, as representative of Thailand in this Biennale. Next door to Elephant World, you have Wat Ba Ajiang. So Ajiang meaning elephants, Ba meaning forest, the forest temple of elephants, temple of forest elephants. It's a Gui temple, it's also a Buddhist temple. And as you can see, there are elephant motifs everywhere. It also houses an elephant cemetery. And the abbot, this man here, Prakru Dr. Samu Han, or just Han, is the son of a Ma Chang, but instead of becoming a Ma Chang himself, he became a monk. It's a site where the baby elephant captures take place, but it's also a site for the preservation of Gui knowledge and heritage. So Han and the other monks at the temple, they actually have records for the Pasa Pi Ba. They have documentation of the language and they keep it. But access to it is complicated. So one of the Ma Chang that I spoke with, he said that he wasn't ready or experienced enough to have access to the Pasa Pi Ba yet. The temple decided that, he needed to have a bit more experience before he could learn. But if you think back to what I was saying, the Pasa Pipa was the first thing that Ma Chang would learn when they could catch wild elephants. So the end of elephant catching has also resulted in a shift of preservation of knowledge from the elephant catchers themselves to the temple. And with this shift, there's also a change in access to knowledge and control of knowledge and authority over that heritage. So a lot of the Ma Chang look to the abbots now to tell them what they should be doing, even though they are the Ma Chang. But they can't catch wild elephants, so they don't feel legitimate, they don't feel real. So they have to look to other people. The main point of these three different sites is that they all serve slightly different purposes and have slightly different audiences. So the Surin Roundup is temporary, it only happens once a year. It's a chance for the Kui to practice skills, maybe more importantly, earn money. It gives them visibility, and there's a very public audience. Same with Elephant World, but this is year-round, and then you also have a museum, which is this cultural space where you can learn about the Kui if you decide to go in. And then Kui Ajiang is more private or intimate. It's still open to tourists, but it's more for the Kui by the Kui, and it's a community space for the preservation of their heritage. I'm pretty much at the end of my talk now. I just wanted to flag that I'm going to Surin tomorrow for the Kui World Day, Kui Day of the World, which is on the 29th of April. So on April 29th, you can think about that, think about the Kui. And then these are the resources that I flagged. I wasn't sure how to link multiple resources. So what I've done is I co-curated a digital exhibition with the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology in Cambridge on the Kui, and specifically on a Pakamrot that I collected for the museum. You can look through the exhibit if you want, but if you scroll to the very bottom, you'll see this image, and these are all the links to the various resources. The page by the Surin Anthropology Center also has links to even more reading. So if you scan that QR code, it should take you to the page, and you should be able to find some more resources about the Kui. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you very much for your presentation, which is very exciting introduction to Kui people. I'm Atikom Sangchai, and I am a documentary photographer, and I'm interested in indigenous culture, especially endangered languages. Mm-hmm. I find Pasa Pipa very fascinating, and can you elaborate a little bit more about this language? Is it based on Kui language, or is it like a secret language among the Ma Chang?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So it's based on multiple languages. I think there's Pali, Sanskrit, Thai. So it is a secret language, but the one word that everyone told me is that elephant is Tewara. So it's a language of substitution, meaning it's not, I wouldn't say like a robust language in the sense of a traditional language, but it's more that certain words, you wouldn't say that word, you would change it to a different word. So you say tewara when you want to say elephant. And yeah, I'm not sure what else there is to say. It's the language that they speak in the forest, in the ba only, when they want to catch elephants to protect them from the pi ba.
What about the situation of the Kui language? Is it also endangered language? Or?
Yeah, so I don't think the Kui language is technically an endangered language, but I definitely came across issues where a lot of people aren't learning the Kui language, and there's a couple of reasons for that. It doesn't have much of a purpose outside of community culture. So if you learn Thai, you can work in Thai. Some people will opt to learn Khmer or Khmer so that they can work maybe in Cambodia. But so few people speak Kui, and everyone who speaks Kui also speaks Thai, Isan, Khmer, like that a lot of people don't see a need to learn the Kui language anymore, but there are still speakers and enough speakers that it isn't considered endangered. The other issue is that Kui doesn't have a written script until recently. So Dr. Sanong Suksoyang, he has come up with a script for the Kui language, and he's teaching that in some primary schools now in the province. So that's part of this attempt at language revitalization.
Thank you.
Any more questions? What's the Kui script based on? Based on the Thai syllabary, or how are they rendering it?
Yeah, it's partly Thai. Up till now, the Kui script has been written in Thai, but I think Kui has an additional tone. So it looks kind of like Thai, but with a lot more circles and lines. So Dr. Sanong has developed it himself. I think he should have resources online if you look it up. He hasn't released the type script yet, so you can't download it onto your computer and type it out. Yeah.
I'm interested in the Pakam rope. What's the function nowadays? Is it just for tourism? Is it just for show? And do you think that the tourism, that we see, is a way to preserve the tradition?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So today, Kui families with elephants will keep a Pakam rope that they give offerings to. If the family goes away for a period of time, if one of their children goes to university, or if there's a big occasion, they inform the rope. They give it a bigger offering, maybe like a pig's head or a chicken, rather than just the Fanta and whiskey. But there's still belief in Prakru Pakam, the god, so there is still worship of Pakam. But many families who don't have elephants anymore, they lose belief in Pakam. They might sell the rope. Pakam ropes are still being made. The older ropes have more power because they were used to actually catch elephants. The newer ropes, they're made, sold for acultural, just as a symbol, I guess, of culture. They're made for people to have in museums, like the one I bought for the museum in Cambridge. And then tourism is very complicated. I go into it in more detail in my book, but I didn't want to get too academic. Tourism is good and bad. The good part is it gives the community visibility, which is one of the main goals of the Kui Association of Thailand, is we want people to know who we are. And it provides a source of income. The downside is that it only represents one part of the community, and people go away thinking that one part is the whole part. And those other parts aren't as marketable, they're not as desirable, so maybe the community loses those unmarketable aspects of their culture and focuses just on what the tourists want, and that's the danger. Yeah.
I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the origins going back to Assam, and related to that, the sort of taxonomy or group in which the Kui language belongs.
Sure. I don't know how much I can say. The Kui language is part of what's called the Mon Khmer language group. And that lumping of Kui as part of the Mon Khmer group means a lot of people think the Kui are a Khmer group. They're not. They're their own group. I didn't focus too much on language, actually, because there's a lot that's been written about the Kui language, including in the Siam Society Journal. And then in terms of origins in Assam, again, the point of my thesis wasn't to really investigate whether what people told me about their origins was true or not. That's the narrative that the community believes. And there really isn't written documentation to say either way. The parts I showed about Thai history is kind of the only written documentation we have about the Kui, and that begins in the 1400s. But again, the justification for Assam as the origin is they have this same culture of elephant catching. They catch elephants in the same way. So when I was speaking to Kui people, they said where there were elephants, there were Kui, and that's kind of how they trace their movements. And there are Kui historians who do trace this in much better detail, looking at the archaeology, looking at language and kind of place names, and where some place names have Kui origins, and that's how they justify that route. So, yeah.
Thank you. I was struck by your comment regarding wild forests and how this related to the catching of elephants and preservation of this ghost language, etc. But could you mention, or could you talk a little bit more about the rates of the loss of wild forests in relation to the loss of tradition, customs, indigenous languages, etc.? I know that this is an area of the world that is one of the most biodiverse and richest in the world, so obviously there's a concern worldwide about the loss of wild forests everywhere, but in particular I'm interested to know a little bit more about Thailand. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So language loss and environmental loss are incredibly interconnected. But what I found interesting about the Kui was, even though Surin was massively deforested, you have a lot of eucalyptus plantations that were put in place by the logging industry instead, and eucalyptus just ruins soil and makes it so you can't really grow anything on it anymore after eucalyptus is planted. But it wasn't so much the loss of forests, it was the regulation of forests. So the attempts to protect forests even made them no longer wild. It was this taking of control. So when the Kui Mo Chang would enter the forest, they performed a ceremony called where they bird ba, they opened the forest. They asked for permission to enter. They gave offerings. They would consult chicken bones to tell them when they could enter. And they relinquished their corporeal identities. They kind of gave up their attachment to humanness, and they became part of the forest, and speaking the Pasapi Ba was part of that. So I thought it was kind of ironic, poetic, that they had this ceremony to open the forest, and then they talk about it being closed, and closed through legislation and regulation. And that regulation could have been to preserve the forest. But because the Kui weren't involved, they weren't consulted in the development of these regulations, the impact wasn't known. And to the community, that regulation took the forests away from them. They made them cultural spaces rather than natural spaces. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but I just wanted to add a bit more of the nuance to that.
Thank you for fascinating. My question is really a rather practical one. Having stood at Chao Kue Ajiang and looked down the escarpment, I can't quite imagine moving elephants up. There must be another way. Really, my first point of the question is, didn't some Kui remain in Cambodia to catch elephants? Is there still any tradition in Cambodia?
Yeah, definitely. So I don't know exactly where they crossed. It was just along that mountain range, so it might not have necessarily been at where Prevahir is, but along the Dangrek range. But the Prevahir temple was an important border crossing point for many communities. It was a place of pilgrimage, but maybe not for elephants. But I'm just trying to remind myself what the second part of the question was, sorry.
Well, really, why didn't the Kui remain in
Cambodia? So there are Kui in Cambodia. But when the border closure happened, the Thai Kui are Thai. They're Kui, but they're also Thai. So they couldn't move to Cambodia because they're Thai citizens. There are still Kui in Cambodia, but that elephant tradition has also been lost in Cambodia. And actually, I think I'm correct in saying it, but I'm not an expert on the Kui in Cambodia. But the Thai Kui are kind of the hub for this remaining Kui elephant culture.
Thank you for a wonderful discussion, very enlightening. I'm wondering, given the importance of elephants as symbols in Thailand throughout Thai history, do the Kui have a chance maybe to get more government support for what they're trying to do, preserve their culture, including the heritage around elephants?
Yeah, definitely. So this comes to the question here of tourism, is it good or bad? And the Thai government doesn't recognize Indigenous peoples in Thailand. So yes, they're happy to support Kui heritage. They've invested millions of baht into Elephant World because, the elephant is such an important symbol for Thai culture. It's an important lure for tourists. Kui elephant heritage identity is really attractive as cultural capital to the state. But the Kui will only be recognized up to a certain point, and that point ends with recognizing and acknowledging that they are indigenous. So the government do help, but they also don't fully embrace everything that the Kui have to offer.
Sorry. My question is more about demographics. So we kind of talk about the three main traditions that are endangered, but there's also the people that practice them. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that a lot of young people don't feel like they can become, I'm not going to try, my pronunciation's bad, but what are we, in terms of the population of people in Surin that actually practice the traditions of the Kui, how is that population changing, I guess?
That's an interesting question, and one that I don't have an answer to because, we don't have stats for that. But what I can say anecdotally is that the role of the Ma Chang has changed. It's difficult to be a Ma Chang. In the past, a Ma Chang still wasn't a full-time job. You would be a farmer and a Ma Chang, and 6 months of the year you might go in the forest to catch elephants, and the other 6 months of the year you'd farm rice. Nowadays, in terms of inheritance of this tradition, just thinking about the elephant keeping tradition alone, so thinking about mahouts, a lot of children aren't becoming mahouts even if their parents were, because it's not lucrative. Keeping an elephant, trying to keep them fed is incredibly expensive. The government stipend of 12,000 baht per elephant per month really isn't enough. A lot of families I talk to do it because they love it, but they don't want their children to do it because they want their children to earn money. And then the added layer of the Ma Chang is that you have to abide by certain codes of practice similar to how a monk would. So a lot of people I spoke to, when I said, your father was a Ma Chang, why didn't you become a Ma Chang? They're like, it's too much work. I didn't want to have to behave properly all the time. So I do think there is a decline in it for a multitude of reasons.
Well, I think there's a lot of things for us to take in, and I think she has thrown to us so many jigsaw pieces. So I think for me, I have the question, it's just the closing remarks, if you give us more. I don't want to spoil your book, but what is your conclusion on this? There's a lot of things on, historical perspective, prejudice, criticism between generations, how to carry on this tradition, the definition of heritage, so many things. So what is your conclusion of this?
I'll try and say it as simply as I can. I think the main point of my research is what happens when you exclude indigenous communities. So what happens when you think that your interpretation of what is heritage, you think your approach to the environment is the right one and the only one. So when the government regulated forests, when they had that border closure with Cambodia, all the subsequent actions, the Kui and the impacts it would have on the Kui weren't considered. So the point is to have more bottom-up approaches to heritage, and dismantle that top-down.
Thank you very much for your time and your very interesting presentation. And thank you very much for you all, lovely audience. You can follow us through Lines, Facebook, or you can become a member. And we have fascinating talks, trips, and a lot of activities lining up for you every month until the end of the year. So thank you very much and good night.